My name is Mary Reid.
M-A-R-Y.
Right?
Middle name?
Well, my middle name is Elizabeth.
Elizabeth. And then last name?
Reid, R-E-I-D.
R-E-I-D.
I was born in Pittsburgh, Pennsylvania, 1927, April of 1927.
April, what date?
9th, April 9th.
April 9th, 1927.
Yes.
Tell me about your family when you were born.
Well, we were very poor. My father was from Tennessee, and my mother was from Pittsburgh. And when I was born, we lived in Pittsburgh then. I had 2 older brothers and a sister. The oldest brother was 10 years older than I was. And so by the time I became aware and a little kid, they were already grown. So it seemed to me as if I was almost an only child. And I always missed not having somebody else. But we were poor, and we lived in row houses on a hill. And so I was never without friends because we played on the streets and in the fields, climbed the hills. Pittsburgh's full of hills. So my mother would warn me when I would be going out to play not to go over the hill. And of course, I didn't till I got to the end of the row and around the row so she couldn't see me. And then I went over the hill because that's where all the kids were.
So what was your father's job?
My father was, he worked for the University for Pittsburgh in the repair department. And he was a maintenance man. And he was very well acquainted with construction, and he could do anything in the house.
Mm-hmm. So it was around the Great Depression, right?
I was born in 27. 29 is when the Depression began. So by the time that, while I was a child, it was the Depression.
Right. Must have been very difficult.
It wasn't for me because I was so much younger, you see. But it was very difficult for my older brothers and my sister because, of course, they were in high school and there was no jobs and so forth. And so, as I say, we were very poor.
Tell me about the school you went through.
I went to a small school, local school, that was, as I said, we lived on the hill. To get to the school, you had to go down the hill. Mm-hmm. And you also had to come up the hill, of course, after school. And so I'll never forget, if you want to hear a sad story, I'll never forget I was a little kid and I was coming up the hill from school, and there was snow on the road, and it was slippery, and the horse and it was a milk cart, and they used horses in those days to carry the bottles, and the horse was down, and he was beating the horse, and that picture has always stayed in my life. In my mind all my life. It's just was such a horrible thing to see for a little kid to see.
Okay,
but
so
it was only once, but things like that stand out.
What high school did you graduate?
I graduated from Shenley High School.
Could you spell it?
Shenley, S-H-E-N-L-E-Y.
Mm-hmm. What year?
That was 45.
And what did you do after that?
Well, when I started high school, I had a desire to learn, and I was very fortunate to be in the high school I was in. They had very good teachers, and they had a good counselor there. And the counselor asked me what I wanted to do. And I said I wanted to be a teacher or a nurse. Graduate nurses were taken from the hospitals to go into the Army or the military.
So when did you join this nurse cadet corps?
Well, it was in when after I graduated from high school, and that would have been in 45. That would be September 45.
So even though the World War II ended, but still there were big demands for the nurse?
Well, this was the last class of the Cadet Corps. And so I was very fortunate to be in it.
Where was it?
It was in the Western Pennsylvania Hospital School of Nursing. I graduated in 48 then. 1948.
So what did you learn there? How much, what was the tuition and what did you learn?
We had no expenses at all. The government paid everything. They, not only the school and the and living in the nurses' quarters, all our food was provided, even our uniforms were provided. And on top of that, for the first 6 months in the cadet course, we were given a stipend of $10 a month. And then after we were capped, that was after the 6th month, we were then student nurses, and we were given $20 a month. And then at the 6 months before our graduation, we were given $30 a month. Now this means $30 a month in those days was a lot of money.
What were you able to do with the $30?
Well, I saved most of it. I'm a saver anyhow, but I saved most of it because I planned on going up to Alaska to see my sister and mother and the family up there. And so I was saving for that.
You volunteered. Your name was not in the list, but you volunteered to go to Korea.
Right. I thought from the movies I had seen, the nurses were lovely and in white uniforms. And
you might have lost your life in the war.
The war to me was the real beginning of life, because I had lived such a sheltered life and had done so little, really, that it opened up the doors of how large life can be if you allow it to be. And I wanted to be in the Army because I felt, not only because of the silly war movies, but because I was very serious. I would never have been able to go to college or to get any education. We were too poor for anything else. And when the government came along and offered all this to me completely free, I felt I owed the Army. I owed the country. And so when I went in, I didn't feel that I was doing them a favor. I thought they had done me a favor and I was paying back. And I feel today that that was the right thing to have done.
Very good. So tell me, when did you depart? From where to Korea?
We left at Fort Warden, not Warden. Well, anyhow, we left from Seattle on the James Sahara, which was a ship that was used for transporting people. And what we found out later, a lot of those people who were on the street waiting to get on the ship, you know, a lot of them were civil servants for the army, going to Japan and to Japan, I suppose, and because they all got off in Yokohama. Only those who were going to Korea went on to Korea, so they were all civil servants. And that was one of the things that when the three of us, when Pat, Andy, and I were looking for the fourth person that we needed for our cabin, we couldn't find anyone that seemed to fit in with us. We realized later that probably the people we were approaching were civil servants. We didn't realize. We thought it was all part of the hospital. So, but it turned out okay, because we eventually gave up trying to find our fourth, and just the three of us just stood there looking kind of lost, because we knew we had somebody else was going to be put in with us. When this tall, good-looking Irish girl comes up to us and starts to talk, and there was no discussion at all. We just looked, the three of us just looked at each other, and we knew immediately this was our fourth, and she was. And we became a real solid relationship of four.
When did you leave?
We left, what was it? I don't remember right now.
Was it summer?
No, it was October. Mm-hmm. I know we got to Korea on the 7th of November.
Mm-hmm.
And so
where did you arrive?
Busan.
Busan.
We went to Japan first, Yokohama, and then those were Korea. We all got off there.
So what was your unit?
The unit was, when it was organized, it was called the 10th Station Hospital. And that was the most ridiculous situation you could ever think of, because a station hospital in the Army is a stationary, permanent hospital. The station hospital, the general hospital, is the ones that are in the States. Those were the big hospitals. The ones overseas were the station hospital. Then the next one down is the Evac hospital. Now the Evac hospital, and then of course in Korea, the MASH unit was developed. But there's another unit in the field. It's called a field hospital, and that's a mobile unit. The Evac hospital is a semi-mobile, and the station hospital is a permanent hospital. Now they sent us a permanent hospital with 50 nurses and 30 male officers to Korea, which really the whole peninsula was combat area, mm-hmm. and turned out to be that way. But of course, when we arrived in the 7th of November, the war was over, because
when?
7th of November in 1950 was the end of the war.
No.
Was the end of the war as we thought of it.
Okay.
Because the Incheon
Yeah.
landing had provided the troops to send our troops up to the border. And so we had no idea there was anything going on. We were coming in to set up the permanent, we would have been the biggest hospital in Korea.
Busan.
Yeah. And not only that, but we were assigned to Shinampo, which is North Korea, where we were to set up our big hospital. So when we came in, however, with this huge unit, they had no place to put us. The people in Busan, the 21st Evac hospital was in Busan. And so we were sent there to stage, but they had no place for us. What they did is they cleaned out the attic, painted the walls, set cots up, and that's where they put us. 50 people. Well, Major Abel and a couple of her assistants weren't there, but the rest of us, 48 of us were there, and you couldn't move without however many eyes wanted to watch you was watching.
That was in Busan.
In Busan, yes. Yeah. And then not only that were we in the attic, and of course, all we had was our foot lockers. And that was the only piece of furniture we had beside the cot. And we were told that the latrine we could use was on the second floor. And there was a pair of steps that went down to that was on the third floor. We went down to the second floor for the latrine. And we were restricted to only going to that latrine. We weren't allowed to go into the hospital. We weren't allowed to walk down that second floor. We were confined to the attic and to the latrine. Well, when we got to look at the latrine, we were a little bit upset by that because we looked in the door and all we saw was a row of small sinks. And on the wall, there were a few commodes with very limited shelter about them. They were mostly just not complete. And so that was and when we looked in, of course, we were children from the Depression. When we looked in and we took one look at that row of sinks and we said, oh, Saturday night bath.
What about the facility?
Terrible.
Equipment?
Terrible.
Medicine?
We didn't have anything to do with equipment and medicine because we weren't there to work. We were only there to stage because they were waiting to send us up to Shinampo to build our hospital. So we had nothing to do. And there was no place to go because we were confined. To send a unit this large into that area was just not good thinking in the beginning. The other building was what was used for quarters, and the male officers were on the first floor, female officers on the second floor. What we didn't know was where the enlisted men were, because when you walked on this compound, you never saw anything that had to do with enlisted. And finally someone said, and we were on night duty at that time, and someone said, where are the enlisted? And some little voice from one of the other tables said, someone said something about over the hill. And we said, over the hill? Over what hill? And with that, we said, let's go. So we all got up and went on and started walking on the far side. And sure enough, we found it was a hill. And it dropped right down. And down on that second level were the greatest tents you ever wanted to see, all reinforced and they all had their own stove, you know, the pot-bellied stove, and they looked so clean, and we were jealous. And I'll tell you, at that winter, when those breezes were blowing through our old school building, we thought many times about going on and saying, I want a tent. Of course we didn't. We wouldn't.
What did you eat?
Well, food became a real problem with the four of us in particular, because that's what we knew about. I was better off than they were because I could eat breakfast. I liked oatmeal. I was used to eating porridge. They would have the scrambled dry eggs, you know, and they had toast and they had coffee. So I could get enough for breakfast. The other three would not even go to breakfast.
Why not?
Because they just wouldn't eat it. And it ended up, we were living on tuna fish that our family sent us. Each family would send us a box in a week, you know. So we had 4 boxes we had a box a week of the food that we asked for. And that was tuna fish and crackers, cookies, relish. And
you didn't eat sea ration?
No. After a long time eating the same thing over and over, you get to the point you can't eat it anymore.
Soldiers on the front line,
yeah,
they were
you know
looking
what?
for sea rations.
Well, they had sea rations.
Right.
They
You
thought
didn't
the
have?
hospital. They thought the hospital food was wonderful because it was hot and it was wet and all that sort of stuff. But we, who didn't have sea rations, all we had was eat the same thing day after day after day, week after week. I mean, you get to the point you just can't.
How much were you paid?
I don't even remember. Because I had my money sent to the bank. I had $10 a month come to Korea for me. And I didn't use much of that.
Exactly, right? Where you can use it, right?
No place. And that was surprising to me. Usually when you go someplace where there are women, you know, who do handwork and so forth, they always bring, just tourists and so forth, they always bring it around to sell to you. The Korean women never did anything like that. They never had anything to sell.
When did you leave Korea?
We left December of '51. We left I think it was 3 days. No, we left the day before Christmas.
Okay.
Because we were in Tokyo Christmas
All right.
Eve.
So, what was the most difficult thing that you remember during your service in Korea?
Oh, those days when we didn't know whether we were going to be overrun by the Chinese when they broke through. Those were scary days. There was nowhere to go. And we certainly didn't want to become prisoners of war.
You didn't regret at the time that you were in
No.
Korea?
No. How could you do that? It was my duty.
You were not human being,
Of course we're human beings.
and you don't regret.
No, and I feel it was right that I should be there.
Let me ask these questions a little bit soft side of it. Were there any romance between nurses and soldiers and so on?
There was no way you could, was no possible way that you could, I'll tell you something. I had an older nurse, Second World War veteran,
Yeah.
and I were very friendly. And one day, one evening, and it was in the summer, and it was a beautiful evening. The big moon, just like this, coming up from and the track on the water. It was gorgeous night. And so the two of us are just standing there enjoying this gorgeous view. And she said all of a sudden, the worst thing about being in Korea is there's no place you can go for an immoral weekend. And that says it all. There was no place. There were always eyes around you.
Mm-hmm. Any particular patient or wounded soldier that you still remember and the reason why?
Yes, we had one come down from the north, and how he ever got to us, we never understood that. And we cleaned them up. They never groaned. They never grunted. They never said a word. And the first day especially, it was nothing was said or done. But by the second day, a few of them would then try to communicate. And it was just, body language and so forth. But it ended up, we would have some of them laughing, and we would be laughing, and just getting them ready, because what are you going to do? They were dirty, they had to have surgery done, they had to be cleaned. The job was very simple to understand.
But what do you mean by cleaning? They couldn't
They
just
were
wait?
No,
I mean, how did you clean them?
Because the water situation, the amount of water we needed and the amount of water we had, what we were interested in is finding the wounds, because we knew that the Turks fought hand to hand. And so you couldn't, and they didn't talk to us, and you couldn't just, you had to look at them to see if there were any signs of wounds. So you had to look at their bodies, and you had to clean the areas where they had to be. But they were dirty. I mean, if there was nothing wrong with their feet or legs, we weren't going to do anything with them, the areas we wanted. But the water situation was a bad thing. And this was non-potable water, of course, you understand that.
I'm sorry?
The water we would be using would be non-potable.
Potable.
Potable means clean.
Yep.
Unpotable is dirty.
Yep.
Yeah.
So,
but it wasn't dirty. I mean, when we cleaned them, we felt they were cleaner than they would have been if they had been left alone.
yeah. And that's all you did
That's all we did.
during your whole service in Korea?
No, only for the 6 days, I think.
And?
6 days we were in Incheon.
Uh-huh.
And then, and of course, in the meantime, the level of confusion and so forth was very high, because the information coming back, we didn't know whether we were going to stay, it would be evacuated out, or what was going on. We just knew something was terribly wrong. And then after a week, we were put back on the train. And that kind of made me feel bad, because these civilians, the place was loaded with civilians, all coming from Seoul and Incheon and all these places trying to get out. And then when they wanted us back in Busan, they just opened the way, and we walked on the train. And I kept thinking those people have been waiting for so long to try to get a train on, and then we come along and take the space. But that's what happened.
Where did you go?
We went back to Busan then.
Busan, and then what did you do?
Well, we found when we got down to Busan that we were put on buses and taken to this compound. And then we found out that this was the rest of our unit, the rest of the 10th Station Hospital.
Uh-huh.
Our male officers and the enlisted were there. And they were on this compound with that had been cleaned up, and very much so, because they had stayed there that whole time when we were going up to Ascom City.
Again?
When we were traveling. No, while we were going to Ascom City, they were here in Busan.
Go ahead.
In Busan, building, cleaning up, and building this, what will be
The station.
the hospital.
Yeah.
Yeah. Well, yeah, it turned out, of course, it didn't stay a station hospital, but it became an evac hospital. The lines would come down from wherever the fighting was going on, and the ones that got into Busan would come to the 21st evac, to the 22nd evac. There was a Swedish hospital down on the bay.
Yep.
And there were, of course, hospital ships in the waters. So this is what we did with our patients, with the ones who had the more seriously would go, say, on hospital ships. We would keep the evac hospitals, keep the patients that were able to be treated and sent back on the line. And that's what we did.
Mm-hmm. So there in 22nd evac, you dealt with many American soldiers, not just Turks, right?
Oh, yeah, it was, we only saw
Only
the Turks.
just for the 6 days.
Yeah.
But tell me about those patients and how serious the wounds was. And
Well, the ones that we kept, of course, are the ones who are going to get better. And they would be people who had, well, frostbite or athlete's feet in the summertime. We would have them sitting out on chairs with the toes spread, and, the feet are very important to
soldiers,
infantryman. And anything to do with the common things that people live with: constipation, diarrhea, upset stomach. What we were worried always with abdominal pain, we were always concerned, was it an ulcer? Because with an ulcer, you have a possibility of hemorrhage. And so if you're suspicious of that, we would send them right over to Japan. We wouldn't keep them. But if it was diarrhea or worms, we had tremendous amount of worms. We had really good worm medicine. And I'll tell you, those guys would come in with worms, and they would be so weak and spent, and we would treat them with our medicine, and in a couple of weeks they'd be a man again. and as soon as they got their strength back, they went back on the line. It was from drinking out of the rice paddles, of course.
Yeah.
And at one time I had a young one come in, and I was scolding him about drinking water. I said, "You know better than that." And he came back at me with, "When you're that thirsty, you drink."
Yep.
And I recognized, I was out of line in criticizing his decision. But anyhow, that was the kinds of things. And of course, we had surgery too, but it would be what we would call dirty surgery. And so, but we treated it, the dirty wounds, cleaned them up, and set them back on the line.
What did you feel when you saw so many wounded soldiers? What were you thinking? You volunteered to come to Korea, right? Your
I thought
name
it
was
was my job. There was nothing to think about. It was my job. And when it really got rough, and we didn't know whether the line was going to hold or not, and that, of course, was where were we going to go? We were at the tip of the peninsula. All that was down there was water, and the only other thing would have been prisoner of war if the Chinese had been able to get across that Datong River. And we never knew from day to day. We had been ordered to hang our helmet with the liner in, our canteen with daily fresh water in it, and our helmet and our musette bag with our important papers, anything important, and a 3-day supply for managing.
Where did you sleep and what was your living condition there?
The compound had 2 old school buildings, and one was the one we used for the hospital. And then, as a evac hospital, we were semi-mobile, so we had big tents. We had tents that held 90 cots, 70 to 90 cots. And we had 10 of those out on our compound. And they would all be full, as well as our hospital. In the building that we used as the hospital, on the second floor of the building, downstairs was the surgery and the administration offices. But on the second floor was the medical ward. And so between all these areas was what composed our hospital. We found out later, however, was the only ones who were sent to the 21st Evac hospital when we got off the ship were we nurses, because our male nurses and our troops, our enlisted people, were not on the James Sahara. Where they were, I have no idea. But they were not with. We really did begin to treat soldiers on the day after, the day after we arrived in ASCOM. It was a day we would now let's see, Thanksgiving was that the 27th. Then it would have been the 28th that we stayed in. And it would have been the 29th that we arrived in ASCOM City, so that it would have been the 29th.
Yeah. So tell me about the situation. How bad was it?
It was horrible.
Tell me detail.
The living conditions, I'm telling you, was
No, I'm talking
impossible.
about the wounded soldiers.
Okay. The wounded soldiers. Okay, so 8 o'clock in the morning we reported to duty. And they said, go to the main building. And the main building was what had been the auditorium during the Second World War, where thousands of GIs went there to be entertained. You know how huge it was. We walked in there, and there was row on row on row on row across this huge room with cots that were 2 together. And then in the Army, if you have to double up on space like that, you have head to toe. And that's what it was. They were filled, all those cots were filled with dirty Turks. Dirty, filthy Turks straight off the battle line. And they all had to be bathed. They all had to be cleaned up so that they could have surgery done. Now, these were not the seriously wounded. You have to understand. We were in a evac hospital. The evac hospital's job in the Army is not, we take care of the that need the care. But our main job is to take care of the people fighting the battles, to get them back on the line as fast as you can. Because there are lots of things that go wrong that can be treated very easily and sent back. And that's what our job was to do. So that's what we were doing here too. And we said, how do you want us to do it? And they said 2 nurses, 1 nurse at each end of the line, and just bathe, clean them up, and then go back the other side.
When you arrived there and when you were around there, how Korea was to you?
Dirty, smelly, ugly, no color. All little, when we left the ship and were driving through the Strait of Busan, I saw no color, no lights. I looked for stores. There were no stores. There were no gas stations, not even a saloon, nothing. And only military vehicles. No civilian anything that worked mechanically.
What did you think about that?
I was amazed by it. Here it was, 1950, and there were no cars, no gasoline, no.
When you left Korea in December 1951, what were you thinking about the future of Korea? Had you ever thought about it, or what were you thinking when you left?
When I left, it was our war in 50-51 was a completely different war than it was in 52-53. And so the only way I would be able to look at it was what I had known. And I just felt it would carry on the same way, but I felt we would eventually win, as we did being able to hold the Chinese back. And I felt it would and when Ridgway came in, he had a different, before Ridgway, when we were under General Walker, we were in retreat. And in retreat is not a pleasant thing to be in.
You know what happened to Korea now, right?
Yes.
How do you know? What do you know about Korea now? Contemporary Korea.
Oh, well, I was over in Korea
When?
in 2009.
2009?
Yeah.
Ah. So tell me about it.
Wasn't it 9? 8, 6, 10. Well, it's close. It wasn't that long ago. I was absolutely astounded. I could not believe my eyes. I couldn't believe my eyes, for one thing, for all the color, all the flowers, everything. And the big buildings. I mean, this was just a whole new world. And the Korean people were different. They were busy and they were smiling. And, when we came in to Korea, the women all wore the same thing, the little white jacket, the
black skirt.
Bloomers, not the skirt. They wore bloomers, looked like, at the waistline, waist and ankles. It was such a foreign look. It was from 05, remember, 1905. They hadn't come past that. But they were very clean. They would take our uniforms, our fatigues, down to the river and beat those fatigues on the rocks. And they would bring them back, and they would be beautifully ironed and folded and just perfect. Yeah.
So what do you think about the Korean War? What is Korea to you now? You have such clear picture of before and after, right? Mm-hmm. What is Korean War to you? What is Korea to you? What is the importance of the Korean War?
Well, I think the Korean War was absolutely a magnificent example of what can be done if you live in the correct manner with freedom. And I know that the Korean people give us, Americans, a lot of the credit for the freedom that you learned was available to you and made use of. And I feel a lot of gratitude to the Korean people for recognizing the part we played in it. And I think also it is such a wonderful demonstration to other second-rate countries of what we did with you.